This is TWiT.
So I have been wanting to talk about DNA and other remains for some time. And we do the rundown for the show a little earlier in the week before the late week news breaks. And we were already going to talk about DNA and other remains. And then it came out that, how convenient for us and the show, and how good for law enforcement and people in California, that a very nasty character seems to have been apprehended, someone that they've been looking for quite some time in California, who's been known as the East Area Rapist and other things. One of these sort of cold cases that folks had kind of given up on finding this fellow, but a determined DA got together with her team and ran some DNA from the crime scenes against publicly available online genealogy databases. And lo and behold, they have arrested someone that they think has a high probability of being this really bad character. His name is Joseph James D'Angelo, the person who was arrested. And this is all good if they feel like they have the right guy and that this guy is going to finally come to justice. Because certainly, if you've been paying attention to the news about this, you know that the things that this serial rapist and killer has been accused of doing are just awful. So the interesting part for us about this discussion and how it segues into our DNA privacy points is the way in which this suspect was identified and apprehended. As I mentioned to you, the law enforcement officers had what they called abandoned DNA from this particular person. The first step, though, was to take DNA from the crime scenes and then run it through. They have not identified which publicly available DNA database they used. And at this point, I should mention that one of those databases, 23andMe, is a sponsor here at the TWiT network. So they haven't mentioned which one they used, but they took crime scene DNA and they must have created, I'm speculating here, but what seems the most logical thing to me that they did is create a false profile saying that the crime scene DNA was the DNA of a customer of one of these sites, so that they could create a profile and then attempt to match that DNA up with other customers of these sites. And through that process, again, I'm just speculating here, they found family matches and found someone close enough to the suspect's DNA. They found distant relatives of this person, and he was the right age and lived in the area. And then they found abandoned samples of DNA from him once they had identified him. And those were a match. And they tested it twice. Those are a match to the crime scene DNA, and a close enough match that they're now going to go forward and attempt to prosecute him. So I imagine, Camille, that you're as fascinated by all this as I am. Do you think that the people who are using these databases are aware that, when they do a cheek swab or spit in a test tube and send it in, that this kind of thing could be the result?
I don't think people are aware at all. There's actually a story that EFF had tracked, I think from 2015, that was with the Idaho Police Department. And Idaho police had done something very similar. They went through Ancestry.com And they had found a suspect. They had uploaded DNA, found a closely related person, then went through their entire family history to find a suspect. Contacted that suspect, brought him to an interrogation room on a separate crime that they said that he had committed, obtained a cheek swab after like hours of interrogation, and made this guy wait for over a month to figure out whether or not he had actually committed a crime. And so under the terms when this person and his family members had signed up for Ancestry.com, there was a statement saying that Ancestry wouldn't share genetic information with anyone. So they actually had no clue that it was shared with law enforcement, and that this could be done.
Right. We remember that guy. We talked about him on the show back in 2015. His name was Michael Usry, if I'm saying his name right,
Yes.
U-S-R-Y. And he got a knock on the door out of the blue. They didn't. He was told by law enforcement that they were investigating a crime and they wanted to ask him some questions. He ultimately was questioned by the FBI. They swabbed his cheeks so they could do the match. And as you mentioned, he was on pins and needles for some time before the results finally came back negative, that he actually was a match to the crime scene DNA. Phew for him. But you knew at that time that it was just a matter of time before the other shoe dropped. And this may not be the only time that the other shoe has dropped since then, but it's certainly a high profile case, and certainly this person is someone they've been looking for some time. So it's a difficult issue, I think, because there is no human that's not happy if Mr. D'Angelo, he still has to go through the process and be tried and convicted, but they now have a suspect, and a suspect that they feel is likely to be the person who committed these terrible crimes. And if that person is found guilty and is punished, that's an excellent thing. I don't think there's anybody who would take too much issue with that. But it's how we get there that is a bit problematic. And there are some things we should mention just on the legal front. Particularly, this happened in the state of California. And there are a couple of wrinkles to this that people might not be considering, a few actually. So for one, in 2008, California became the first state to authorize familial line testing. Searches can be requested only when law enforcement has a suspect and the DNA is tested against, now these would be government databases containing samples from people arrested or convicted of felonies. And the California Attorney General says that it has run 192 familial searches since 2007 in 108 cases. So that's not quite what we're talking about here, but it's a close cousin to going to, beyond a government database to a public consumer database. And then another interesting wrinkle is that this familial, the collection of DNA to create these government databases that then can be used in familial line testing, that was found by the Supreme Court in 2013 to be not a violation of the Fourth Amendment. That's something that the EFF weighed in on at the time, was not happy with the decision and how it came out, and sort of forecasted that we could find ourselves in situations where people are being pulled over for a run-of-the-mill traffic violation, for example, and having their DNA collected because they have encountered law enforcement in a misdemeanor or a felony situation. I believe in California you can only have your DNA collected by law enforcement if you are a felon or if you're part of a felony investigation, or if you're part of a misdemeanor investigation and have a felony record. Okay, so we have those things going on. And then the other thing going on is what these, and I think this is a real can of worms, what these consumer DNA matching sites tell people that they're doing with the DNA, what they actually do with the DNA, and then what they must do if law enforcement comes to them. And I think that these may be different things. As you pointed out, Camille, I don't think that people know exactly what these sites do with the information that they host. I know that people don't routinely read the terms of service. The terms of service oftentimes do spell out that people will, the companies will comply with valid law enforcement inquiries. But it doesn't seem like that even needed to happen here. If someone creates a profile and sort of games their system by saying, oh, this is my DNA, but in fact it's a suspect's DNA, or a crime DNA collected from a crime scene, then that's certainly a great way to catch a killer. But I don't know that it's a great way to that maybe they're in violation. Are they in violation of the CFAA, perhaps, Camille, by doing this?
Probably not, because law enforcement actually went on and they created the details of exactly what happened with the Sacramento killer haven't been fully released yet. But there have been some people theorizing that law enforcement went on, created a fake profile, uploaded the DNA, and from there actually just used the systems. The way that the platform's set up to like match and find family members. And so you could potentially argue that the creation of a fake profile is a CFAA violation. However, I don't see a company suing the government for that. And
the government would likely be immune, but it's an interesting thing just to point out that people have been subject to Computer Fraud and Abuse Act claims because they have created fake profiles on social media. But here we have something slightly different from social media, but I think the principle would be the same.